A woman abandoned by her husband is unexpectedly hired by billionaire Harrison Ford's company. Little did she know, the day she walked through the doors of Ford's company would be the day her life changed forever. "That dress again?" Hendrix's voice sliced the morning stillness like a blade on glass. He didn't look up from his phone. Didn't even blink. Violet held her breath, the hanger still in her hand. The red dress, the one he used to say made her look like someone powerful, like she belonged in the world he ruled. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes and quietly slipped into the bedroom. The mirror didn't lie, but it didn't comfort either. 46. 2 children gone to college, crow's feet dancing at the corners of her eyes, and a silence growing louder between her and Hendrix each day. She dabbed on a little more blush, not for beauty, but for courage. The dress hugged her figure just right. Maybe, just maybe, tonight she'd look like a woman worth keeping. The gala was a sea of diamonds and designer perfumes, all clinking glasses and plastic laughter. Violet moved through the room like a misplaced piece in a luxury showroom. Her heels clicked across marble as she searched for him, brushing off fake smiles and empty greetings. She knew his routines. He'd be near the champagne fountain, where the cameras lingered and flattery flowed freely. She was halfway across the ballroom when she overheard them. 2 women draped in sequins and privilege, clutching their glasses like tiny trophies. Poor woman doesn't even see it coming. Swapped her out for someone half her age. What's her name? Natalie? Yeah, the assistant. He brought her to this Riviera last month. Violet still thinks they're happily married. Violet froze. The clink of ice in their glasses sounded louder than the orchestra. Her hands trembled slightly as she kept walking, each step heavier than the last. She found him all right, exactly where she knew he'd be. He stood in his usual spot, tall and commanding, every inch the man people listened to. But it wasn't the location that wrecked her. It was the woman beside him. Natalie, barely 30, glowing in a backless silver dress. Hendrix leaned in close, whispered something into her ear that made her laugh. A light, fluttery thing that belonged at brunch, not here, not with him. Then he stepped forward and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've got something to share." His voice filled the hall. "Life's too short for lies, so here's my truth. I'm in love with Natalie. She's the woman who makes me feel alive again." There was a sharp gasp, maybe hers, maybe someone else's, a few scattered claps. Then the murmurs rolled in like a storm tide. Sympathy, gossip, scorn. People stared, some with pity, some with curiosity. Violet didn't feel anything yet, not rage, not heartbreak, just a numbness, like she'd left her body and was watching from the ceiling. She didn't even flinch when Natalie leaned in and kissed his cheek. The red dress, the heels, the lipstick, it all felt like some cruel costume now, like she'd walked into her own funeral in full glam. Violet turned and walked out, the world spinning around her. Rain had started to fall by the time she got into the taxi. Fat drops blurred the city lights, made them look like watercolor smudges on glass. She dug into her purse with fingers stiff from the cold, pulling out her phone. No missed calls, no texts. She tried the home security app. Locked out. Tried the joint bank account. Access denied. He hadn't just humiliated her. He'd erased her. 12 years of marriage. 2 decades of love, she thought. But really, it had been slipping through her fingers longer than she cared to admit. The late nights, the secretive trips, the subtle cruelty disguised as sophistication. All those times she told herself, "It's just business. He's just stressed." No, he was planning this, grooming the replacement while letting her believe she still mattered. The taxi pulled up to the driveway. The porch light was off. The door didn't budge. She rang the bell, waited, rang again. Nothing. Even the house felt colder than usual, like it knew she no longer belonged. She didn't scream, didn't bang. She just stood there in the rain, mascara bleeding down her cheeks, arms wrapped around herself like armor. The driver rolled down the window a bit. "Ma'am, you want me to wait?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. 5 minutes passed. 10. She walked back, drenched and broken, sliding into the back seat with a wet thud. Her voice came out hollow. "Take me anywhere that's not here." And that's when it came. Not pain, not sorrow, something else entirely. It started in her gut. A slow burn. An ache that reached her spine and climbed higher. The feeling was bitter, steady, unfamiliar. She didn't name it yet, but it had teeth. It didn't just hurt. It wanted something. Retribution. Recognition. A reckoning. As the taxi moved forward into the rainy night, Violet looked out the window, the city lights warping like a distant dream she once had. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was rebirth, sharp and unforgiving. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't coming back the same woman who left. Violet rented an old motel to stay overnight. The room smelled like bleach and stale cigarettes. Violet sat on the edge of the creaky twin bed, legs pulled close to her chest, watching the pale yellow wallpaper peel at the corners like old scabs. The heater coughed once in a while, barely enough to warm the space. Room 304 of the Liberty Motel wasn't much, but it was what she could afford. The front desk clerk had looked at her like she didn't belong there, still in her soaked red dress, heels in one hand, dignity trailing behind her like a torn hem. But he handed her the key without questions. Maybe he saw it before. Maybe women like her showed up more often than she imagined. She hadn't eaten all day, and now the only thing that waited in her tote was a half-empty cup of instant noodles and 3 sugar packets she'd swiped from a coffee station. Her stomach growled, but her pride screamed louder. She ate anyway. The noodles were bland, salty, soulless, but they were warm, and right now, warm was enough. Maria called the next morning. Violet didn't answer the first time. She didn't have the energy to talk, to lie, to pretend like she was figuring things out. On the second call, she picked up. "Vi, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said. That lie again. "You don't sound fine. Where are you?" "Somewhere cheap." She exhaled. "He locked me out, Maria. Changed the accounts. Everything." "I've got nothing." There was silence on the line for a second, then Maria's voice, soft and broken. "That bastard." That was the first time anyone said it out loud. Violet sniffled. She hadn't cried since the gala. Something inside her had shut off, but hearing someone name it, acknowledge the betrayal, shook her. "Don't worry," Maria added. "I'm here. You're not alone." And that meant more than Violet could say. The next few days blurred together in a rhythm of survival. She pawned her pearl earrings first, then the gold locket Hendrix gave her on their 10th anniversary. Finally, the wedding ring, cold and heavy, like it still carried the weight of every promise broken. She held on to it longer than she should have. Not for sentiment, not even for anger, but for the sheer disbelief that a life could unravel so fast, so completely. When the pawnshop clerk handed her the cash, crumpled bills that smelled like grease and metal, something inside her cracked again. Still, she kept going. She applied for jobs, grocery stores, reception desks, office temp work, anything. Every time they saw the 12-year gap on her resume, their eyes shifted. "You haven't worked since 2011? I was raising a family." They smiled politely and passed over her application like it was a lukewarm coffee. Each rejection dug a little deeper, made her wonder if maybe she really had become invisible. Just another washed-up woman with nothing to offer. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw less of herself. Her voice had grown quieter, her spine a little softer. She missed the girl who once believed she'd take on the world. One night she scrolled through her phone. Habit, not hope. And there it was. A picture. Hendrix and Natalie lounging on white sands, Maldives tagged at the bottom. He was shirtless, grinning like a man who never had regrets. Natalie, in a bikini that cost more than Violet's monthly motel fee, curled against him like a cat with a new owner. She sat frozen. The noodles on the nightstand had gone cold. The heater hissed in the corner. Outside, a siren wailed into the distance. But inside her, silence stretched so far and deep, it could swallow her whole. He was living his best life, and she was here. The tears came quietly at first, a slow drip, then a storm. Ugly sobs that made her shoulders shake and her breath hitch. Not just because he left, not even because of Natalie, but because it felt like he took her value with him. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, she opened her old college box, the one thing she carried out of the house that night. Inside, pictures from her 20s. Violet with sun-kissed skin, holding a best-in-class business award. Violet in her debate team blazer. Violet laughing, hair blowing wild in the wind, nothing and no one holding her down. That girl had fire. She didn't care if people liked her. She made things happen. She got accepted to Harrison Business School on her own merit, and she gave all that up. For him. For their family. She traded her ambition for a white picket fence, and now even the fence was gone. She stared at the photo. Something stirred. Maybe she couldn't go back, but she sure as hell didn't have to stay down. That afternoon, she fixed her resume, removed the apologetic tone, replaced homemaker with household operations manager. She updated her LinkedIn profile even if it had cobwebs. She typed with a new resolve, fingers shaking, heart steady. She applied again and again. Then came the email. Subject line, interview invitation. Harrison Global Group. At first, she thought it was spam. She stared at it for a good minute. Harrison, her dream company. The one she gave up to follow Hendrix overseas. The name felt like a ghost from her past reaching out, tapping her shoulder. Interview set for Tuesday. Administrative assistant to executive director. She had 3 days. No fancy clothes, no business suit. But she had an old black blazer in her duffel. It still fit, mostly. She ironed it with the motel's borrowed press, cleaned her shoes with a wet rag, and practiced answers in the bathroom mirror until her voice didn't shake. Tuesday morning came with frost on the window and nerves in her stomach. The elevator hummed as it climbed toward the 42nd floor, carrying Violet along with the weight of every choice she had ever made. Her palms were damp, knuckles white around the leather strap of her thrift store purse. Her reflection in the mirrored walls stared back at her. Older, tired, but not broken. Not today. She had rehearsed everything. How to greet them, how to speak clearly, how to sit without fidgeting. But as the doors slid open with a polite ding, every ounce of preparation evaporated under the towering shadow of Harrison Global. The lobby was sleek, surgical almost. Glass, chrome, quiet like a cathedral for power. The kind of place where words mattered less than results, and where someone like Violet didn't belong. She stepped up to the front desk. Violet Dawson, 10:30, interview. The receptionist, young, polished, almost robotic, nodded. Conference room D, ma'am. Down the hall, first left. Thank you, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The hallway felt longer than it was. Carpet muffled her footsteps. Her stomach churned as she passed portraits of founders and major milestones, the name Harrison Ford etched into glass plaques and gold-lettered awards. She didn't know what she expected. But it wasn't this. 3 people waited at the long table inside conference room D. One woman in HR with a forced smile. A man from operations who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. And then, him. Harrison Ford. He was nothing like the magazine covers. No carefully lit glamour shots or performative grins. Just a tall, lean man in his 50s. Suit tailored to silence rather than flash. Eyes sharp enough to slice through steel. His hair was steel gray, combed back with military precision, and his gaze didn't blink when Violet walked in. She swallowed hard, sat straight, folded her hands in her lap like she was bracing for a storm. The questions started easy. Background, previous experience, technical knowledge. Violet stayed calm, steady, but it didn't take long for the edge to creep in. "You've been out of the workforce for how long?" the HR rep asked, her tone more curious than kind. 12 years, Violet answered. "I managed my household full-time during that period." "And why return now?" the man from operations asked. "Because I'm not done," Violet replied, her voice firm. "I still have value. I'm not someone who fades into the background quietly." There was a beat of silence. Then Harrison spoke for the first time. "You think this place runs on sympathy, Miss Dawson?" His voice was deep and cold, like gravel soaked in rain. Violet didn't flinch. "No, sir. I think it runs on performance, and I'm confident I can deliver." He stared at her for a long moment, eyes unreadable. Then he stood. "Interview's over." She thought it was a dismissal, but then he turned to the others and said, "Have her start Monday." And just like that, she was in. Her first day was worse than she imagined. No orientation, no coffee and donuts welcome, just a schedule crammed with impossible expectations and a corner desk outside Harrison's office. Every task was urgent. Every error was lethal. By lunchtime, she had already corrected 3 memo typos, scheduled 2 reschedulings of the same meeting because Harrison didn't like the location, and dealt with an investment analyst who broke down in tears after Harrison told him flat out, "Your idea's stupid." Violet kept her head down. She took notes. She double-checked emails. She learned quickly that Harrison didn't like being asked things twice, or 3 times, or ever, if you could help it. He walked fast, talked faster, and seemed to live in his own orbit of efficiency and ice. On the second day, he gave her a 40-page contract and said, 3 inconsistencies. Find them. You've got 2 hours. She found 4 in 70 minutes. He didn't say good job. He just said, next time, do it in 60, and walked away. Some nights, she cried in the restroom, not sobs, just quiet tears that slipped out without asking permission. She cleaned her face with the scratchy brown paper towels and straightened her shoulders before stepping back into the war zone. But there was something in it she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. No one held her hand. No one asked how she was feeling. No one pitied her. She was judged only on what she could do. And slowly, she was proving she could do a hell of a lot. Then came the error. Late Friday, the office nearly empty, Violet stayed behind to file reports. A contract caught her eye. Something in Clause 17. 4 didn't sit right. The wording was ambiguous, something about shared liability that could cost the company millions if the deal went south. Her hands trembled as she reread it. Most assistants would have filed it. She could have. Should have. But she didn't. She knocked on Harrison's office door. He was still at his desk, working under dim light. He didn't look up. "I'm busy." "I know, sir, but I think there's a serious issue in the Silverstone contract, Clause 17. That got his attention. He looked up slowly. "What about it?" Violet stepped forward, held out the marked-up copy. "If the client defaults, we're still on the hook for 70% of cost. The language shifts responsibility to us without a specific trigger clause." He took the document, scanned it for a few seconds, then again. The room was so quiet, Violet could hear her own breathing. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. "You're right." 2 words. That's all he said. Then he handed her the paper and added, "Fix it, by morning." She nodded, throat tight. "Yes, sir." As she left, he said one more thing. "You're smarter than you look." It wasn't a compliment, exactly, but in his language, it might have been the highest praise she'd ever get. Monday came colder than it should have. A sharp wind swept through the city, and with it came a new rhythm in Violet's step. She stood at the corner outside Harrison Global, coffee in one hand, her other tugging her coat tighter across her chest. Her breath rose in small clouds, but her mind was clear. She'd fixed the clause, tightened the language, cleaned the liability, and cross-checked every paragraph. When she handed the corrected contract to Harrison that morning, he didn't say a word, just took it, gave a short nod, and returned to typing, like it was expected. Like she'd simply done what she was hired to do. But she knew. He'd trusted her with $1 million decision. That meant something. The days after that moved like a slow climb up a mountain. Painful, thrilling, exhausting. She still made mistakes. Everyone did. But fewer and fewer as the weeks went on. She started keeping a notebook. Not for journaling, but strategy. Names, habits, preferences. Harrison didn't like email clutter. Liked his coffee black, but only after 10 a.m. Preferred meetings done face-to-face, not over screens. Noticed everything. Forgave nothing. Violet adapted. She learned to anticipate needs before they were voiced. Learned to cut through office politics with quiet efficiency. When Harrison was speaking in a boardroom, she was already lining up the next step. When he barked for numbers, she handed him the latest metrics. Tabbed, color-coded, precise. Her blazer stayed pressed, her heels low but sharp. Always ready. Always 5 steps ahead. One evening, the office buzzed with tension. A last-minute investor meeting had turned chaotic. The projector failed. The tech guy nowhere to be found. People whispered, eyes darting. Harrison stood still, arms crossed, jaw locked. Violet stepped forward. She walked to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and began sketching. Flowcharts, financial projections, risk assessments. Her handwriting was clean, her voice calm, and within minutes, the room stopped watching the board. They watched her. She explained the proposal like it was her own, broke down the numbers, answered questions without blinking. The investors leaned in. Even Harrison looked still. When she finished, she capped the marker and stepped back. The silence in the room held weight. One of the board members let out a breath. Well, hell, that was the clearest breakdown I've heard in months. After the meeting, as everyone shuffled out, Harrison passed her without pausing. But he spoke low, just loud enough for her to hear. I'm impressed. That was it. No smile, no pat on the back. Just 2 words from a man who measured compliments like gold. And to Violet, it meant more than any applause. The little things began to change first. She got invited to meetings that were once way above her rank, was trusted with drafts before they hit the hands of legal. Her seat moved closer to Harrison's office. Her name started to show up in email threads that included vice presidents and division heads. Even her wardrobe shifted, slowly. A newer pair of shoes, a blouse not from a clearance rack, nothing flashy, just solid, capable. And when she looked in the mirror each morning, there was something different in her eyes. Less fear, more fire. She didn't need validation anymore. She was living it. But something else shifted too. Something less professional. Subtle at first, like the way Harrison's gaze lingered a second longer during briefings. The way he asked, one evening when they both stayed late, "You always this prepared?" She smiled gently. "No, just with the people who never forgive mistakes." He tilted his head, lips twitching just slightly. Smart. Another night, long after the others had gone, they sat in the conference room. Papers between them, the lights dimmed except for the table lamp. Harrison's tie was loosened. Violet had taken off her heels. They were discussing a client portfolio, but the conversation slowed, stilled. Then Harrison asked, almost offhand, "Why now?" She looked up. "Why what?" He held her gaze. "Why come back to work? After all this time, after whatever it was." Violet took a deep breath. "I was betrayed, left behind. Everything I thought I'd built with someone disappeared overnight. I needed to prove something." "To him?" "To myself," she said quietly. There was a long pause, his expression unreadable. "Fair," he said. And that was the first time she saw it, just a flicker, something behind his eyes that wasn't cold, not exactly warm either, but human, weathered. Like maybe he knew the taste of betrayal too. By spring, the office looked different. Or maybe it was Violet who had changed. Her desk was no longer by the hallway. It now sat just outside Harrison's private office, angled perfectly to catch the morning light. The secretary downstairs had started calling her Ms. Dawson instead of the assistant. She had her own keycard access, her name on reports, her initials on memos, and most days, people listened when she spoke. It didn't happen all at once. The shift came quietly, like water smoothing stone. A late-night proposal that Harrison passed off as hers during a morning call. A quiet thank you from a junior analyst she coached through a client crisis. A glance from the boardroom when someone said her name. The small signs added up, until suddenly, Violet wasn't just part of the machinery anymore. She was running it. By May, she was named Senior Executive Assistant to the CEO. The promotion came with a new office, a generous raise, and a view of the skyline that stretched all the way past the Hudson. She stood at that window on the first morning in her new office, coffee in hand, and let the city remind her just how far she'd come. And still, she didn't stop. She showed up earlier than anyone, stayed later, led prep meetings, reviewed contracts, studied reports. When Harrison needed answers, she had them. When he needed silence, she gave it. When he needed pushback, she didn't flinch. They became a rhythm. Not quite partners, not quite friends, but something steadier than either. She learned the tone in his voice that meant a headache. He learned to trust the look in her eyes when she spotted something wrong in a file before it reached his desk. It wasn't soft, but it worked. That summer, the company hosted an internal celebration. 10 years since the South Korea merger, now one of Harrison Global's most profitable branches. The rooftop terrace was strung with soft lights, jazz hummed low in the background, and the smell of grilled steak mixed with expensive cologne. Violet wore a navy dress, simple, clean lines, sleeves to the elbow, hem just below the knee. It wasn't flashy, but it fit her just right. She didn't need glitter anymore. Power had its own kind of shine. She sipped her wine, listening politely to a VP from legal explain something she already knew, when a familiar voice broke in. "Do you dance, Ms. Dawson?" She turned. Harrison stood beside her, his jacket open, tie loosened slightly. His face, for once, didn't carry the weight of 5 departments, just a man in his element, confident, composed. She blinked. "Not since... well, it's been a while." He offered his hand. "Come on, one slow song won't kill either of us." She hesitated. Just a second too long. Then she took it. They moved in silence at first. He led with calm precision. She followed, surprisingly steady. The others watched, of course. She felt their eyes. But for once, she didn't care. His hand rested gently on her back, not possessive, not suggestive, just there. She felt the strength in his frame, the control in his touch. But there was something else, too, something she hadn't expected. Warmth. Midway through the dance, he said quietly, "I used to think women were a complication I couldn't afford." She didn't reply, just held his gaze. He continued, "Too emotional, too unpredictable. Got burned early, I guess." She let a beat pass. "And now?" she asked, voice low. His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Then I met you." Her stomach tightened, but she didn't answer. Not with words, not yet. Because no matter how steady his hand was, how soft his tone had become, Violet Dawson had learned. You don't step into warmth too quickly, not when you've been burned before, not when you're still learning what power tastes like. Elsewhere in the city, a different fire burned. Hendrix was unraveling. At first, it was slow. Small cracks he thought he could ignore. A delayed payment here, a bounced email there, but Natalie's spending had escalated. First handbags, then diamonds, then investment deals she wasn't qualified to understand. And Ricardo Mendez. The name popped up too often. First as a young genius she'd met at a fundraiser, then as a business partner. Then as a regular name on Hendrix's credit card statements, fine dining, private jets, hotel suites in Dubai. One night, Hendricks came home to an empty penthouse, drawers open, jewelry missing, laptop gone. Natalie left a note on the counter. Just 6 words. Don't follow me. Ask Ricardo why. He tried to track her, of course, but the money had already vanished. Joint accounts drained. Assets moved. Ricardo had been the puppet master all along, and Hendricks? Just the aging fool who never saw the strings. Debt collectors started circling. Partners backed out. His reputation, once gold, now rusted in every corner of Manhattan. And for the first time in his life, Hendricks Martinez didn't know what to do. Back at Harrison Global, Violet was presented with a new challenge, leading the expansion project into the South American market. The role was massive: international oversight, budget control, direct reporting to the board. And Harrison handed it to her with little more than a quiet, "It's yours." She looked at the thick folder, then at him. "This is a lot." "You've handled more," he replied, sipping his coffee. "Why me?" He shrugged. "Because I trust you, and because you don't ask for permission to do your job well." The truth hit her in waves. This was the first time in her life someone had picked her, not out of convenience or expectation or obligation, but out of recognition. She wasn't somebody's wife anymore, somebody's shadow, somebody's support system. She was somebody. And as she left his office that afternoon, clutching the folder to her chest, Violet didn't feel scared. The South America expansion project changed everything. Not just for the company, but for Violet and Harrison. They worked side by side now, more often than not well past office hours, poring over logistics reports, cultural strategy proposals, and delicate investment frameworks. These weren't polite check-ins or status updates anymore. This was trench work, deep, demanding collaboration built not on hierarchy, but trust, and something else, something quieter, growing in the spaces between their words. Most nights, the office floor emptied out long before they rose from their seats. The buzz of the copier faded, the overhead lights dimmed to half, and the only sound left was the occasional scratch of a pen or the clack of a laptop key. Sometimes Harrison would bring her coffee without saying a word. Sometimes she'd slide a revised document his way before he asked for it. There was comfort in the rhythm, but also tension, unspoken and thick in the air like a storm waiting its cue. One night, well past 10, she stood by his office window stretching her back. The skyline flickered with life. Yellow lights in tidy rows, people with stories, some not unlike hers. Harrison was still at his desk, reviewing a multi-market budget plan she'd outlined. But when he looked up, she caught the glimmer of something new in his expression. Not approval, not curiosity, something personal. "You take pictures?" she asked softly, noticing a camera resting on a side shelf. An old Leica, well worn, the leather strap darkened with age and use. He blinked, surprised she'd noticed. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I used to." "Before all this," he said, gesturing vaguely around the room. "I still do sometimes. Helps me. Slow down." Curious, she moved closer. He didn't stop her. She picked up the camera gently, thumbing over its metal body. "You shoot people or places?" "Both," he replied. "Used to travel. Cambodia, Kenya, Florence. Always packed a lens." There was a pause. Then he added, "She hated it." "She." Violet looked at him. He didn't flinch. "My ex-wife," he said. "Didn't like when I disappeared behind the viewfinder. Said I stopped seeing her when I started seeing everything else." Violet lowered the camera. She didn't ask questions, didn't press, just gave the silence room to settle. Later that night, as they wrapped up the last of their notes, he offered, "You hungry?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Actually, yes." They went to a small restaurant just a few blocks down. No white tablecloths or reserve-only booths, just brick walls and warm lighting and the scent of garlic and butter thick in the air. Harrison chose a booth in the back. Violet ordered grilled salmon. He asked for steak, rare. They didn't talk shop. Not once. Instead, they talked about music. He liked old blues, she preferred soul. About movies, he hadn't seen anything in a theater in years. About their worst first dates. His involved a woman who spent the whole evening Instagramming her food. Hers included a man who referred to her as ma'am 6 times in 1 hour. The laughter came slow at first, but it stayed. When dessert came, Violet sat back, smiling in a way she hadn't in years. Not because it was expected, not because it softened a moment, but because she felt light. Real. "I'm scared," she admitted, not even sure where it came from. Harrison looked up from his espresso. "Of what?" She stared down at her hands. "Of letting this be more than what it is. I've been through a kind of hurt that rewires you, makes you question your own worth." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know that kind of hurt," he said. "I've built whole parts of my life just to keep it out." They met each other's eyes. "But maybe," he said carefully, "this time, we learn to love without losing who we are." She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in slowly, and when their lips met, it wasn't urgent. It wasn't rushed. It was a long exhale, a promise not yet spoken, a line being crossed, not recklessly, but with intention. They didn't talk about it much after that. Back at the office, everything was business as usual. Sharp schedules, precise memos, measured tones. But something shifted in the air between them. A glimmer of softness in Harrison's voice when he asked for updates. A flicker of calm in Violet's eyes when she handed him a brief. They kept it private, carefully. They both knew the game, and they both knew the cost of being sloppy. But not everyone was blind. Jenna Monroe wasn't. Head of finance and a woman who'd carved her path through the ice with stilettos and spreadsheets, Jenna had once shared something unspoken with Harrison. It had never been official, never needed to be, but she had made her intentions clear, and he had, for a time, allowed her proximity. Then Violet showed up, quiet, older, not from the expected pedigree, and somehow, she had his attention. Jenna noticed, and Jenna didn't like to lose. It started with offhand comments at meetings, subtle digs about emotional decision-making and personal biases disguised as budget concerns. Then came the whispers, too faint to accuse, too loud to ignore. Violet knew the type. She'd dealt with them before, women who wore power like armor but used it like a knife. She said nothing, kept working, stayed ahead. But she also didn't smile as much in meetings, didn't let her guard down around Jenna. Not anymore. And Harrison? He said nothing either. But when Jenna tried to reroute a funding request Violet had already cleared, Harrison responded not with silence, but with correction. Firm. Final. "No changes go through without Violet's sign-off," he said, voice steady in the room. Jenna's lips twitched, but she said nothing more. She waited for another chance to change this game. It started with the smell of coffee, not the comforting aroma she usually looked forward to every morning, but a sharp, bitter scent that sent her stomach into instant revolt. Violet barely made it to the restroom in time. She leaned against the cold, tiled wall, breath shallow, her blazer wrinkled from kneeling too fast. She thought it was stress, burnout, maybe the flu. But 3 days later, when the nausea persisted and her emotions hung just a little too close to the surface, snapping at small things, crying in silence at a documentary about birds of all things, she knew. She bought the test during lunch break, stuffing it into her purse like a shoplifter. She didn't go back to the office that afternoon. Instead, she checked into a quiet corner booth at a diner on 52nd and waited for the sun to go down. She didn't want to take the test in a public bathroom. Didn't want to stare at those pink lines under fluorescent lights while strangers came and went. She waited until she got home. Waited until she'd washed her face twice, poured a glass of water, then stood in the bathroom doorway like she was preparing to walk into a courtroom. 3 minutes passed, then 5. 2 lines. Clear. Undeniable. She sat on the edge of the tub, heart thudding, everything else inside her stilled. Pregnant, at 47, with Harrison's child. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt truly unprepared. Not because she didn't want it. A part of her, small but fierce, clung to the idea of a second chance at family. But the fear towered over everything else. The timing, the whispers, the weight of what this would mean not just for her, but for him, for them. She didn't tell him right away. For 5 days, she walked through the halls of Harrison Global carrying a secret that grew heavier by the hour. She smiled in meetings, briefed reports, gave presentations with a steady hand, but her heart beat out of rhythm behind her blouse. She tried to picture what he'd say, tried to believe he'd take it well. But Harrison wasn't a man known for flexibility. He lived in structure, in control. A baby didn't fit neatly into that. One evening, as they finished a late review of the South America rollout projections, he leaned back in his chair, loosened his tie, and looked at her like he could sense something wasn't right. "You've been off this week," he said softly. "Something I should know?" Violet stared at the screen in front of her, the numbers blurring. She exhaled, closed the laptop, looked him in the eyes. "I'm pregnant." The room didn't move, neither did he. For a long, brittle moment, he just sat there, expression unreadable, hands still, his breath almost too quiet to hear. She felt her throat tighten. "I didn't plan this. I didn't expect it, and I sure as hell didn't want to ambush you with it during a work week, but I needed to tell you." Still nothing. And that silence, longer than it should have been, cut deeper than words. Then, finally, he said, "Okay." Violet blinked. "Okay?" "I'm not ready," he said. "But I'll get there. If this is something you want, I'm in. All the way." She felt her lungs finally open. Her shoulders dropped. "I do want this," she said. "But I need you to mean that." He leaned forward, hands on the desk, voice low but firm. "I've never said anything I didn't mean. Me." After that, something shifted. Harrison, ever the control freak, threw himself into preparation, but in his own quiet way. He didn't shower her in cliches or flowers. He didn't suddenly turn into a romantic. But he started sending her home earlier, moved her meetings to late morning, hired a discreet health consultant, restructured their weekly report deadlines without her asking. A week later, he drafted a proposal for a corporate childcare program, comprehensive, on-site, and fully funded. He never said it was for her, never brought it up. But she found the draft in a shared folder marked Future Infrastructure Initiatives. He was building something permanent, and it included her. But storms have a way of circling just as the sky begins to clear. Across the city, Hendricks was running on fumes. Ricardo Mendez and Natalie had drained him dry. Not just financially, emotionally, reputationally, legally. Every corner he turned, another creditor waited. Every meeting he scheduled got canceled before it began. The penthouse was gone. The office shuttered. The cars sold. The press had started sniffing around. Once rising real estate star loses it all. He hadn't seen Natalie in weeks. She'd disappeared with Ricardo, somewhere between Dubai and Milan. He was alone now, and when a man's got nothing left, he starts looking back. He Googled her one night, Violet Dawson. What he found stopped him cold. She was all over the business journals, featured on a panel about global expansion, listed as senior executive assistant to Harrison Ford. Her picture was sharper than he remembered, more focused, less eager to please. She looked strong. Then came the video. An interview from a leadership summit. Violet sitting comfortably between two industry heavyweights, speaking about strategy, sustainability, and leadership in uncertain times. She spoke with clarity, confidence, and not once did she mention him. The lobby was quieter than usual that morning. A soft hum of conversation drifted from the reception desk, punctuated by the tap of polished shoes on tile. The glass doors of Harrison Global opened with a whoosh, efficient, impersonal, like everything else in the building. And then he walked in. Hendricks Martinez. He didn't belong there. Not anymore. His once tailored suit hung awkwardly on a thinner frame. His tie was loose, his shoes scuffed. There was a hollowness around his eyes, like sleep had become optional and food had turned into an afterthought. He moved toward the front desk like a man walking into court, unsure whether to plead or confess. "I'm here to see Violet Dawson," he told the receptionist, voice low and dry. The young woman blinked, clearly unsure how to handle the request. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" He offered a strained smile. "She'll want to see me." His name made its way upstairs before he did. Violet was in the middle of finalizing a high-level budget draft when her assistant peeked in, pale and tight-lipped. "There's a Mr. Hendricks Martinez in the lobby. He's asking to speak with you. Said it's personal." For a moment, the room tilted, just slightly. She didn't speak, just closed her laptop gently and stood. She didn't rush. She didn't fix her hair. She smoothed the hem of her blazer over her growing belly and made her way down to the lobby, every step grounded, precise. And there he was. When Hendricks saw her, it was as though someone punched the air from his lungs. His gaze fell, almost immediately, to her midsection. The fullness of her pregnancy was impossible to miss now. She was glowing. She was calm. She was untouchable. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he said, "You look good." Violet tilted her head slightly. "What are you doing here, Hendricks?" His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "I had to see you. I needed to." There was something in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Not charm, not confidence, something raw, something that might have once resembled regret. "I was wrong," he said, voice hoarse. "About everything. About you. I thought Natalie was—" He stopped, swallowed. "I thought the grass was greener. Turns out it was fake." She didn't flinch. She'd played this moment in her mind before, but it always ended with her trembling. She wasn't trembling now. "I'm not angry anymore, Hendricks," she said. "Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I let go." He looked like he might cry. "Can you ever forgive me?" She paused, her voice steady. "No," she said, "and thank you." His brow furrowed. "Thank you?" She nodded once. "For leaving, for breaking me down, because if you hadn't, I'd still be living in your shadow, apologizing for my ambition. I wouldn't be this woman today." He opened his mouth again, but this time, no sound came out. And then a quiet presence emerged at the top of the stairs. Harrison. He didn't interrupt. He didn't approach. He just stood there, arms folded, watching, his expression unreadable but firm, respectful. He let her handle it, because he trusted her to. Hendricks turned, following her gaze, and saw him. There was no mistaking who he was. His jaw clenched, the pride still buried deep somewhere in his bones. "This him?" he asked, eyes narrowing. Violet met his stare calmly. "Yes." "He the father?" She raised her chin. "That's none of your business." Silence fell between them, thick as smoke. Then Hendricks took a step back, defeated in a way no business loss had ever made him feel. He nodded once, slowly. "Take care of yourself, Violet." And then he walked out of the building, into the sunlight, a man stripped of title, reputation, and relevance. He didn't look back. The fallout came fast. Within weeks, Hendricks's real estate firm officially filed for bankruptcy. Properties were seized, partnerships dissolved. Word spread that Natalie had sold his mother's house behind his back before fleeing to Dubai with Ricardo. No one heard from her again. And Hendricks? He was last seen working part-time at a mid-tier firm out in Jersey, living in a modest apartment 2 blocks from a gas station. Rumor had it, he drank too much, talked too loud about the past, showed people pictures of a woman he used to know, one they didn't recognize anymore. Violet didn't think about him much after that, not out of cruelty, but because some chapters don't deserve to be reread. That fall, Violet was invited to speak at the National Women in Leadership Summit, an event attended by executives, investors, and thought leaders from around the country. The invite didn't come as a surprise. Her work in the South America expansion had not only brought record returns, it had reshaped how the company approached global growth. Quietly, consistently, she had risen. The morning of the summit, Harrison waited in the lobby of their building. He wasn't in a suit, just a dark button-up, no tie, sleeves rolled. He looked almost casual, except for the way he held himself like always. Unbending, composed. "You ready?" he asked. She smirked, slipping her arm through his. Always. They arrived together, and though nothing was said outright, people noticed. On stage, under soft lights, Violet stood at the podium in a deep emerald dress. She didn't read from notes. She didn't need to. Her voice carried across the room with ease, seasoned, certain. "I've been invisible before," she said. "I've been underestimated, dismissed, forgotten, and I've learned something. Invisibility isn't permanent, not when you decide to stop asking for space and start claiming it." Applause thundered across the room. Later, backstage, a young woman approached her, nervous, clutching a notepad. "You're amazing," she said breathlessly. "Can I ask, how did you come back after losing everything?" Violet smiled, gently touching her belly. "I stopped waiting for someone to save me," she said, "and started building something no one could take away." The delivery room was quiet when it happened. No panic, no chaos, just soft voices and the steady rhythm of machines. Violet held on through the pain with a stillness that came not from calm, but from years of learning how to survive storms without screaming. Then came the cry. One sharp, angry note that filled the sterile air like a trumpet, and Harrison wept, not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow leak of tears that rolled down his cheeks while he stood frozen at the edge of the bed, eyes locked on the tiny human wrapped in white and handed gently into Violet's arms. The nurse smiled. "Congratulations, Mom. He's perfect." She stared down at the baby, dark hair, full lungs, strong grip, already wrapped around her finger like he'd been waiting to meet her his whole life. Harrison stepped closer, reached out with a hand that trembled just a little. He's really here." Violet smiled through exhaustion. "Alejandro, that's his name." Harrison's eyes flicked up to hers, glassy and soft. Then, in the lowest voice she'd ever heard from him, he whispered, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." It wasn't the first time a man had said those words to her, but it was the first time she believed them. The days that followed were a blur of midnight feedings, soft lullabies, and whispered conversations over baby monitors. Violet was no stranger to hard work, but motherhood at this stage of life carried a different kind of weight, one filled with both quiet joy and unspoken fear. But Harrison was there through all of it. He showed up to diaper duty in the same crisp determination he once reserved for mergers. He learned how to swaddle like he'd been doing it for decades. He made room for softness, for slow mornings, for lullabies in Spanish that Violet hummed without even realizing. At work, their relationship, though never flaunted, was no longer a secret, and neither was Violet's influence. She returned from maternity leave with a clear agenda and a sharper edge. But it wasn't ambition for its own sake. It was personal now, intentional. She knew what it meant to navigate pregnancy inside a corporation built by men, for men, so she changed it. Violet introduced a new initiative under the Human Capital Development Program, the Maternal Bridge Project, a comprehensive support system for expectant mothers and new parents. On-site childcare, private nursing rooms, extended paid leave, flexible scheduling. It was met with hesitation by the board, as expected. But she came armed with data, personal testimony, and the full support of Harrison, who, when asked if the policy was necessary, simply said, "We invest in infrastructure. Why not invest in the people who build it?" The project was approved within the quarter, and within the year, it was replicated by 5 other Fortune 500 companies. Not everyone celebrated. Jenna Monroe watched from the shadows, her pride worn thin. The whispers she'd once started now echoed back to her as proof of her own irrelevance. She didn't just dislike Violet, she resented the way Violet had arrived. A child out of wedlock, a baby with the boss, a belly and a boardroom all in the same photo shoot. She didn't see strength, she saw a shortcut, and she wasn't the only one. Jenna quietly aligned herself with Harold Gray, an old shareholder with a grudge against Harrison's rise and a long history of corporate sabotage dressed as concern. Together they staged a whisper campaign. Anonymous emails, rumors leaked to trade blogs, claims that Violet had manipulated her way to the top, using personal influence rather than merit. The final blow came in the form of a formal complaint submitted to the Ethics Oversight Committee, claiming conflict of interest and abuse of executive privilege. The board called an emergency meeting. Violet walked into the room calm, unbothered. Harrison sat at the head of the table, but he didn't speak first. Instead, Violet did. She laid out her performance metrics across 5 fiscal quarters. She recited every benchmark, every return, every policy initiative she'd led from conception to implementation. Then, she slid a folder across the table. Inside, digital timestamps, forwarded messages, a chain of correspondence between Jenna and Harold, mocking Violet's pregnancy, strategizing how to cut the ladder beneath her once she got too comfortable. Silence rippled through the room. Violet looked at Jenna, who sat frozen. "I didn't rise because of a man," Violet said. "I rose because of what I brought to the table, and it's clear some people in this room don't like who's sitting here." Harrison didn't need to say much. He leaned forward, locked eyes with Harold, and said, "You're finished." Then to Jenna, "Clear out your desk." Just like that, the storm passed. Months later, in a televised interview, Violet sat across from a well-known journalist, dressed in pale blue, calm and poised. "You're a mother, a leader, a survivor. How do you carry it all?" the host asked. Violet looked into the camera, not rehearsed, not polished, but real. "I lost everything once," she said. "I know what it means to be at the bottom, to be forgotten. But I learned something important along the way. What scares us most isn't losing. It's starting again, and yet, that's the only way we ever build something worth keeping." There was a time when Hendrix Martinez couldn't walk into a room without people adjusting their posture. A time when he shook hands with senators and sealed deals with a glass of bourbon and a single nod. That time was gone. Now he lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that always smelled faintly of bleach and burnt dryer sheets. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The water heater groaned in protest every morning. His neighbors never said hello. It wasn't poverty, not in the textbook sense, but it was humiliation in slow motion. He'd been turned away from every investment pitch for the last 8 months. His name, once a selling point, now floated around boardrooms like a warning. No one returned his emails, even fewer returned his calls. He kept one suit clean in the closet, just one, for when opportunity knocked again. But deep down, he knew that door didn't exist anymore. Then one morning, waiting in line at the corner store with instant coffee and antacids, he saw it. A magazine. Entrepreneur Weekly, right there by the gum rack. On the cover, Violet. Not just her, but Harrison too. Their hands linked. Their son, Alejandro, perched between them in a soft blue sweater, smiling up at his parents like the world was exactly as it should be. The power couple reshaping Latin business culture. He stared for a long time. Her smile wasn't forced. Wasn't the kind of polite smile she used to wear at his events when she was playing the part of the good wife. This smile had roots. This smile belonged to someone who had risen. The cashier coughed behind him. Hendricks flinched, dropped a crumpled 5 on the counter, and left without his coffee. 3 weeks later, he saw her again. It wasn't planned, not entirely. He'd heard through old contacts that Violet sometimes dined at Leona's, a quiet restaurant tucked into a brick-lined alley near Harrison Global's headquarters. He used to take clients there, back when he had clients. He waited 2 nights in a row, ordered nothing but water. On the 3rd night, she came in, hair tucked into a low bun, pale pink coat wrapped around her. Alone. He watched her from across the room for a moment. Then, heart thudding in his chest like it hadn't in years, he stood and approached. She looked up from her menu, and when she saw him, her face didn't change. No gasp, no smile, just recognition, and something cooler. "Violet," he said softly. "Can I sit?" She hesitated, then gestured to the chair opposite her. "I won't take much of your time," he started. I've been thinking. About everything." She nodded slowly, resting her hands on the table. Her ring caught the candlelight, simple, elegant, unmistakably new. "I made mistakes," he said. "Terrible ones. I lost sight of what mattered. I lost you, and hell, I don't even know what I want right now. Maybe just a second chance, a way back to something." She didn't interrupt, didn't even blink. Then she spoke, her voice calm, firm. "You were my whole world once," she said. "I built everything around you, and when you walked away, you didn't just leave a marriage, you shattered the woman who loved you." He swallowed hard. "But I survived. I rebuilt. I found something better, someone better. And now, I'm not looking back, Hendricks, because now I am my world." He stared at her, speechless. Then came a familiar voice behind him. "We've got an ultrasound appointment." Harrison, casual in a dark coat, but his presence still carried weight. He walked over, placed a gentle hand on Violet's back, and gave Hendricks a nod that was neither warm nor hostile, just final. Hendricks looked at them both, saw the way she leaned into Harrison without thinking, the way her face softened at the mention of their child, another child. "You're expecting again," he said hoarsely. Harrison simply smiled. "A girl this time." And that was it. The nail in the coffin. They left arm in arm, her laughter trailing behind like wind chimes. Hendricks sat alone for a long time afterward, long after the check had been paid and the restaurant had cleared. Later that week, a storm rolled through the city. Rain fell hard and fast, washing the streets clean. Hendricks sat by his single window, a blanket draped across his shoulders, the glow of the television lighting his gaunt face. The news played softly. Violet Montero Harrison, named one of the top 10 most influential women in Latin enterprise, continues to expand her philanthropic work. Her face appeared on the screen again, her voice steady, clear. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he said it aloud, just to himself, just once. "Some mistakes. You don't come back from." The words hung there, swallowed by the sound of rain. Chapter 11. Phoenix and Flame. 1,210 words. 5 years later. The magazine cover glowed beneath stage lights. Forbes. Bold headline. The woman who changed the corporate soul of Latin America. Violet Montero Harrison stood beside the image, smiling as the audience rose in applause. She didn't wave. She didn't bow. She simply stood. Graceful, grounded, fierce. In the last 5 years, Violet had built more than a reputation. She'd built a movement. The Rising Mother Foundation had helped over 60,000 single mothers re-enter the workforce, offering microloans, mentorship, and family care programs across 10 countries. Alejandro was now a bright, curious 5-year-old who liked puzzles and always asked questions before bed. His baby sister, Camila, was almost 3, full of attitude and the spitting image of Violet in both stubbornness and spark. Harrison's hair had more gray now, but his steadiness hadn't changed. He moved beside Violet like he always had, not in front, not behind, but in lockstep. Supporting, never eclipsing. That night, at the Foundation's annual gala, Violet took the stage in a deep crimson gown, one that mirrored the infamous red dress she'd worn the night Hendrix betrayed her. But this time she wore it not as armor, but as celebration. She stepped to the microphone, waited for the crowd to settle, then began. "There was a time I believed my story was over," she said. "That the love I gave was wasted, and the years I lost could never be recovered." A pause. "I was wrong." Applause. Quiet, but rising. "I was betrayed. I lost everything. But sometimes the worst thing that happens to us is also the thing that sets us free. I used to wait for someone to see me. Now I make sure every woman I meet knows she was never invisible." The room erupted. Meanwhile, not far away, in a used bookstore, Hendrix flipped through a travel magazine he couldn't afford. He stopped at a photo, a familiar face. Violet again. Now a global speaker, a philanthropist, a leader. He smiled, just a little, bitter but honest. "She's the light I tried to dim," he muttered to no one. "And she became a goddamn wildfire." Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere high above the city, beneath glass and gold, Violet stood with her family, eyes fixed on the skyline. This was her story now. Not one of revenge, but of reclamation. A phoenix, not just rising, but flying, and setting the sky ablaze. The story of Violet Montero Harrison is a powerful journey of transformation, resilience, and self-worth. What begins as a tale of betrayal and heartbreak slowly evolves into a radiant portrait of rebirth. Violet's path, from being discarded and broken to becoming a respected leader, a mother, and a voice for thousands of women, is deeply moving and undeniably inspiring. What makes her journey so compelling is not just the external success she achieves, but the internal shift she undergoes. She does not seek revenge through bitterness, but through growth. She doesn't scream to be seen. She builds herself into someone impossible to ignore. Her strength lies in her quiet defiance, her grace under pressure, and her refusal to let anyone define her future. The most profound lesson this story leaves us with is this: sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find who you truly are. It's a reminder that no one is ever truly invisible if they dare to stand up for themselves, to start over, and to reclaim their voice. Violet's story teaches us that dignity, love, and purpose don't come from others. They begin within. And when we stop waiting to be saved, we discover we've had wings all along. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.